Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Level Up. This is a week of practical conversations about skills and perspectives that you can build and apply to the world of work. My name is Sean Connaughton. I'm a Deakin alum and teaching fellow within the university, and I also coach leaders and teams on all manner of things. Inevitably, there's some component of change in that work. And that's what we're focusing on today. We're going to be exploring what it takes to stay level-headed through disruption and the seemingly influx of constant change that we all are experiencing. To help us in this conversation, I've got three incredible panelists, and I will be encouraging them to respond to some questions initially, but there is a Q&A function that you can respond to, and we'll get to those questions towards the end of our time together. But first, I'll get each of you to introduce yourselves and respond to our first question for the day. And the question is really change fluency as a concept. What does it mean to you? And why is it something that we should be talking about more? So, Janet, maybe I'll get you to start. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you all. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Janet McLeod. I run a boutique consultancy called Janet McLeod. I am also a Deakin alum and a past Deakin staff member. I'm a current Deakin student. I'm doing my PhD in workplace trauma. So really strong ties to the university. So very grateful to be here. Thank you for having me. The work that I do is I practice as an organisational psychologist, and the work that I do revolves around change. Everything I do revolves around change. Change is a integrated part of our work life. It's no longer something that we need to get through. It's not an event that we need to get through. It's something that's integrated in how we work, how we live. And so it's part of my everyday. The work that I do predominantly is around leadership development and coaching and culture work. My view on change fluency and why I think it's a really important thing that we're talking about today and an important thing that organisations need to talk about and keep talking about is that it's different to something like change management, because it's about being very present with what is unfolding in the moment. So change fluency is the capacity to be with change and notice how it's unfolding and to be able to extract the relevant information from change as it's unfolding. So you can use that information in real time and decide what you need to do and how you need to show up in the change in real time. So it's a different capability. It's a different capacity to change management or even adaptability. Adaptability is part of change fluency, but it's more than that. And it's more than coping. As you say, Sean, it's about steadying yourself and being able to move through change without becoming dysregulated. Great. So you have the best opportunity to respond appropriately. There's a lot I could say, but I'll stop there and allow my panelists to jump in.
Thank you, Janet. Adrian.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And a great start. So good to be here. So Adrian Medhurst, my name. I co-founded and run a company called Benny Button. And I'm also Deakin alum. Very fond memories of my time at Deakin. The work I do at Benny Button really focuses on the intersection of performance and well-being. And in that, it's understanding the various things in our workplaces, but also in our lives that lead to fluctuations in well-being and performance and their relationship. So change is integral to the work that I do. A lot of leadership development work as well, but right down through to employee level work. And in technology and data tools that support monitoring and diagnosing and understanding that as well. But change fluency, it is an interesting concept and one that I think just is a nice word, like the idea of the flow in that, because to Janet's sort of starting comments, we don't just manage change as if it's something that can be put in a box and controlled with some predetermined sort of system or sequence of steps. Yet at the same time, we can know certain things that can be quite predictable and repeated, but it's to hold some space to notice when it's right to take that next step that's in the sequence, or is there a pivot that's necessary, and not just being stuck with the sort of prescribed, predetermined plan and assume that everything's going to play out like that. So I think there's lots of capabilities that support that aren't necessarily invested in with employees, because some people can be better at working through change than others. And how do you even work with that sort of diversity in a empathetic and supportive way? But again, I'll wrap it up by saying I sort of like echo what you're saying with change management. Like time management, well, change continues to happen just like time continues to happen. You don't manage it, but you can manage yourself, and you can manage and support with each other. So drawing on a capability and a skill set that helps you to do the right things at the right time with the right people, I think that's what it means to me.
Marcel?
Thank you. Yeah, lovely to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation. And I too am a proud Deakin alum. Fabulous memories of my time at Deakin University. I am the managing partner at Future Leadership, looking after the advisory arm of the firm. We think about ourselves as a capability ecosystem. So we provide executive search and talent services for our clients, as well as through the advisory work that we do, leadership development, people and organisation transformation, talent and succession, coaching work, and some more. This concept of change fluency, I love the idea of it being a flow state in some ways. I think of it as the ability to move through change, to grow through change, and to move through it without being destabilised by it, to be able to re-anchor pretty quickly, recalibrate. What are the data points telling me, and how do I work through this, whether that be taking action or not taking action? It's not about loving change, and it's not about being too hopeful or optimistic that everything will be okay. I think we have to be realistic around change and how that is felt and experienced by people. But I think when we're fluent through change, we can move through it and not have it be completely overwhelming. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for those introductions, and already hearing some of the tensions that probably point to why change can be so challenging to deal with. Also, Adrian, you mentioned capabilities, and I'm really keen to get into your thoughts on what are things that people can do differently to navigate change better. But before we do that, if we just take a step back and think about that constant state of adjustment that it feels like a lot of us are in now, this ongoing change. What makes it feel so relentless right now? Why does it feel so much harder than maybe it used to be navigating the world of work at the moment? And Marcel, maybe you could kick us off.
Yeah, I think there's three elements. The first is the volume of work that is expected to be produced. The volume of decisions that need to be made, the volume of data that we're dealing with, that seems to be more, larger volumes than perhaps we've dealt with historically. And I think technology has certainly helped us in so many ways, but also created a lot of volume. I'd say the second element is pace. So things are happening so quickly. Again, I go to technology. I read something recently that pointed to a new AI advancement emerging every 3 to 6 weeks. So gone are the days where we thought about change and our response to these emerging conditions as being 6 months, 12 months transformation programs of work. We are literally needing to recalibrate and adjust in real time. I think the third element is this sense of invisibility. And what I mean by that is a lot of the work that we need to do to respond to change and work through it and navigate the volume and the pace can almost be invisible. It's about the cognitive switching that we have to do to jump from meeting to meeting, decision to decision. There's the emotional effort and the brain fatigue that comes with that. So how we are readjusting to different norms and to different principles and ways of working. I think it's a lot is happening internally within a system and internally within people just to show up and work and contribute in the workplace day to day.
Yep. And Adrian, I'm curious to get your thoughts on what are the early warning signs or the things that we can be looking for in ourselves or the people that we work with that maybe point to some of the invisible bloat and additional work that can exhaust us over time?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting and tricky one that you've brought up as well. When we think about the volume and the pace, and we think about how technology can mean that there's always something that we could be doing that's at our fingertips, but we've still, as human beings, got to find ways to find the right things to focus on and then bring the skills to the table for that task. But switching can happen quite quickly, but it does come at a cost, particularly what's known in the specific switching space as context switching.
Mm-hmm.
So we may be doing a particular task and there might be quite a volume of work associated with it and a deadline pressure, so we've got to work with pace. And then we will need to, or it is possible that we switch to a very different task quite quickly that is of a very different nature. And all of a sudden we need to have an emotionally compassionate conversation with a real human being when we were just spending time in a Excel spreadsheet doing rational, logical, sequential work that we need to get out the door. And it does come at a cost. There's the cognitive drag of staying stuck with the previous task that's unfinished, the need to ramp up the speed of emotionally intelligent skills to engage with the human being in front of you. And that's just one example of a switch in context with our tasks that if we're not careful, we have a lot of them through the course of a day. We get exhausted by it. And actually, the lags between letting go and getting up to speed, they also come at a productivity cost. So the volume of work and the pace of work can only then become harder and harder if we're not really careful and skillful about how we manage that.
I also just wanted to add as well, there's some really great work by Jennifer Garvey-Berger out of Harvard around leadership mind traps. And she talks about one of the mind traps that as humans we often fall into, which is this bias for simple stories. We often want to simplify complexity and have a very clear input, output, and kind of cause, if you like, and therefore a simple plan for dealing with it. And I think that is perhaps creating rigid thinking. So when we are navigating change, we might be quite impatient to get through it. We're not necessarily sitting with that complexity and giving it the patience that it deserves to work through. What are all my options here? Have I consulted all the data points? And that can be, I think, a response that we can have when we are navigating change, and it's a sign that we're perhaps getting worn down by it, that bias for action, that bias for a simple story, and that almost impatience to get through it quickly when that's not necessarily helpful.
And I think, as you've both pointed to, that this is the reality of work and that switching is a part of our roles. And it's a reality that many of us, most of us, have to work with every day. And I think that intentionality with switching is one of the ways to manage it. So what I find that's really helpful is when you are switching between contexts, when you are switching between tasks, bringing a level of intentionality so that you know that you're switching. And that way you can put something down and then pick something else up, which reduces the risk, Adrian, as you pointed to, of that residue from the previous task. In terms of the symptoms that you asked about, Sean, I don't think there is one universal symptom or sign that someone is under pressure or stressed. What I find is really helpful is to be very aware of your own symptoms and signs of when the switching is costing you, as you've both said, around it might be mental capacity, it might be energy, it might be productivity, to really tune into what are the signs for me when I know that it is costing me and that cost is unhealthy or that cost is unproductive, or it's a cost that I'm not willing to tolerate, so that you can see those signs early and then address it. So if you're noticing that things are popping up in your day, signs of, for example, distraction or lack of focus or procrastination or just feeling a sense of fatigue, step back and ask yourself, how have I been switching across my different tasks? How have I been switching across contexts? Do I need to pause? Do I need to take a break so that I can deal with the risks of working in this way, which is a big part of our reality?
Yeah, and I'd go, and I know that you'd believe this as well, but the opportunity for the individual, but then the opportunity for people around them.
Absolutely.
Are we seeing something in someone that looks a bit out of character? And is that a signal perhaps for us to take a moment and exercise our own patience and to have some empathy rather than, oh, I need that thing by that person and they haven't delivered it yet? Well, instead, hey, if that's out of character for them and perhaps they, now that I slow down and look, they look a bit worn out, maybe I should check in, you know? And I think that's something that's really important because different people will be different in this regard. There are some people that have a high level of distress tolerance and they may be able to cope with changes and the pace of change and the volume or the load that they're under. Then there's people that have a higher or lower tolerance for ambiguity. They can deal with the uncertainty and not find it as destabilizing as other people. So there's some more, I guess, character, dispositional, sort of more stable traits of people. And then at the same time, a lot of the capabilities we can talk about are things that people can develop and get better at and get more confident in. And so I'll wrap up by just saying one of the things that I do see, which is like there's a long spectrum when it comes to burnout and its dimensions. So I don't want to jump right down the deep end of the pathology of it being at a level of, you know, clinical significance. But with how much is going on, little impairments in how people are functioning because of that overload, because of the pace and the uncertainty as to what should I prioritize and can I keep all of the plates spinning or the balls in the air or whichever metaphor people can visualize and relate to the most. But yeah, there's lots of capabilities and there are differences across people and we need to hold some space to be mindful of how that all plays out for different people.
Really good points. And, you know, that example of everyone coping with change differently, I think is a perfect example of why simple stories don't work, you know, because we don't all respond in exactly the same way. And Janet, some of your examples of or suggestions around understanding the costs of a certain way of behaving as the starting point to doing something different. I'm also curious about what you think about exploring the potential benefits of a certain way of acting might be serving. You know, why, if we assume that we don't do things to intentionally get in our own way and make things difficult for us, you know, what might looking at the benefits of a certain way of behavior, how might that serve us?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. Thanks, Sean. I think that we demonstrate different behaviours and strategies as a way of coping with the moment. We do these things to cope and to be with what is unfolding and what is in our life or what is in our work. And so ultimately there can be benefit to some of our strategies. But the only way we know whether it's of benefit or not, or whether it's not of benefit, is if we're aware of the strategy that we're using and we have that level of that capacity to be able to step back and observe how we're responding to change in the moment. So yes, we can use a strategy that has benefit and we can use strategies that have cost, or we can use a strategy that comes with both benefit and cost. No one strategy will serve you positively in every situation. So what might be of cost in one situation might be a benefit in another situation. So the only way to know whether your strategies are working for you is to be present with it and to be reflective of it. And if you're present and reflective of it, it gives you a chance to pivot. It gives you a chance to course correct. Because what might work for you for a certain amount of time may not work for you for the rest of the journey. So it really doesn't, I think it speaks to the capability of change fluency. It's being aware as you're moving with change. It's being aware as you're moving through change, having a level of consciousness as you're working it through so that you do have the capacity to test, is this working for me? Is it still working for me? Is there another strategy that could work for me better? Do I need to make a shift here? Do I need to course correct? But if we are moving through change, as we see many people do, which is I'll close my eyes, I'll push through and hope for the best, you don't have an opportunity to course correct. You don't have an opportunity to be adaptable, to flex. So that's what I would say in relation to strategies and the benefits of it. It really depends on the context. Yeah.
Actually, I'm thinking of a practical example of that around, so in my role and even with our clients, helping them set the narrative and communicate around change is really important. And thinking about a strategy, the messaging that I put out there to support change and support an organisation through change is actually a strategy. The message I'm putting out there, the language I'm using, the communication content is a strategy. And that strategy can be framed up in many different ways. That content can take an empowering angle. It could take an angle that kind of dials up the heat and encourages people to move through change at pace because there's so much changing around us. The ability to then reflect on that change message and how it landed, what emotions did it evoke in people, how did I feel delivering it, what kind of impact did it have, that would be, to your point, Janet, a reflective exercise around what was the benefit of that strategy and that comms message. Where did it land? Where didn't it land? Recalibrate and try something different next time or repeat that message. And I think that's a really tangible, practical example around demonstrating change fluency, demonstrating a strategy for a leader who needs to galvanise perhaps a team or a workforce at scale beyond an individual tactic, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I completely agree. When I like to think of, you have strategies and then there are like systems through which things happen.
Yes.
And I've kind of said it in that way so that we know that the systems can actually signal to us, well, in the idea of fluency, when are things flowing and when is there friction? And can we be mindful of what that looks like and what the forces are that we're working with? So one of the underlying frameworks that's got a long history, job demands resources theory, but really demands and resources multi-level. I'm that much of a nerd that I was invited to speak at the 25th birthday celebration for that theory in the Netherlands last year. But I find it such a powerful system to help everyone understand that there's the individual layer to this, demands and resources. Where is their flow? Where is their friction? Some of the things that people will find demanding in that they require effort also net a benefit in terms of being motivating because it's a challenge that they have the right resources for. So there's a good fit. And for other people, a certain demand that might be associated with change might be straining and stressful. Yeah. Okay, well, they may not have control over changing that demand, but could they look to resources that could support them in overcoming the friction and finding some flow? It could be a resource they invest in to develop for themselves, or it could be that there's some social support that can buffer that and help people through periods. So whilst we say that it's all happening and we don't necessarily know what is going to unfold, but we need to be present to it, there are these trustworthy, evidence-based systems that can give us some signs. We can work with them as an engine room to support change.
Yeah, really, really good point. And I always think about the job demands resources model as a bit of a scale that you try to balance where the resources are greater than the demands. But to your earlier point around everyone coping with change differently, not all jobs and resources and demands are created equal. But I would love to hear from you, Adrian, and Marcel and Janet. What are some of the resources that perhaps we're not tapping into enough that people could be thinking about as they're trying to cope with change better?
Yeah, good question. And I mean, I'll start by even sharing in the work that I do, I talk about work-life agility instead of work-life balance because there are these competing forces and understanding what levels people are at and what are they bringing to the table, what are the circumstances from an employment standpoint, and to your point before as to, well, something might be working for a period of time and then it stops working as effectively. That might be because in the passage of time, you've used up that strategy and you need to see that a new approach is needed, or circumstances elsewhere have altered what a person can bring to the table. Yeah. And so there are some really important resources that people can invest in for themselves that I like to think of resourcefulness is a very helpful way to think about what we can tune into and invest in for ourselves. If I do notice that for myself, I've got a pattern of resistance when there's change or I feel uncomfortable with uncertainty, we might not be able to control the uncertain things that are happening or the changes that are happening, but could we perhaps upskill and form a relationship with that where we can manage ourselves being more mindful of how we might react and how uncomfortable it might be if we don't know, and ensure then that if all of this requires energy, can I maintain some energy? Can I invest in my recovery rather than having counterproductive ways that I cope with the discomfort of a change that I'm resisting, which can take you in a downward spiral? What's that other side of the scales, to use your metaphor? I think it's helpful. What might I invest in over here, whether it's in myself, for myself, or with others that can help me through this?
And so there's a thread of intrinsic resource in what you're saying. How do we build this ability to identify what we can control and expand that circle? I'm also curious, Marcel, as a leader or someone working in a team, what are some of the resources that you could tap into, tomorrow when you're trying to help people cope with change that's happening right now?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that came to mind just in that conversation. I almost feel like stories and shared experiences that are shared, communicated at scale are a resource. Because when you can normalize experiences and normalize how people are navigating change and talk openly about examples, history, case studies, stories, whatever it might be that have played out before of how we've navigated similar things or we've navigated hard things, I feel like that is very comforting and helpful for people. So I think that is a perhaps cultural artifact resource that people have at their disposal. I think also resources are things like our self-talk, our internal dialogue, our belief systems, our patterns of thinking that help us appraise situations, reframe situations, and navigate change, navigate job demands. A couple of things come to mind there. It's the good old growth mindset. Do I have expectations around perfectionism? Do I try to control things and keep a tight handle? And to what extent does that actually become inhibiting, if you like, and affecting my ability to deal with change? There are a couple of thoughts that come to mind around the things that we are working with internally and that we can create. I've got a mantra for leaders, and I often share, only do the work that only you can do. Now, that is helpful when you've got control over resources and a team and you can delegate, but it's really important because otherwise, if we are trying to suck it all up and we're in an executive role or a senior role and do it all, we are not going to have the bandwidth, the resources to navigate the changing landscape around us. So how do we really distribute leadership? That is a resource. Think about where work is being done. That is a resource, and therefore free up our own capacity and our own physical resources, our own energy to be able to lead through change.
And your point starts to come back to your comment, Janet, about the cost of doing things a certain way. And if you are the leader that takes everything on and wants to, take all the bullets to protect everyone else, that can come at a cost to you that is unsustainable in the long term.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like there's an element of coming together required to navigate change effectively, that one person simply can't do it all.
Absolutely. And I feel that there's so many thoughts coming into my mind right now from what I've just heard. Really wonderful conversation, everyone. When you think about change and change leadership, the leader is navigating the change as well as leading their team through change. And I think that that's partly why change is so challenging to lead and to navigate in organisations, because as you're going through it, you're bringing other people through it. So what that speaks to is self-regulation. So the leader needs to make good decisions around bandwidth. The leader needs to be reflective around well-being and the intersection between well-being and performance. Because if the leader isn't able to hold that, if their leader doesn't have capacity for all of that, the leader cannot lead their team through it. And so there's this flow-on effect. If your leader is dysregulated, guess what? The team, they're going to notice that. Whether it's conscious or unconscious, their nervous system is going to pick up on, my leader is dysregulated, and that's going to signal potential threat. And so the leader has a level of responsibility to manage their own state so that they're able to lead their team through it, but also to give positive signals that it's okay, this is safe, we have resources, we have a plan, we have a strategy, you are supported. But if the leader is dysregulated, those messages are diluted, and that comes at a cost. But also it speaks to the fundamental role and responsibility of the leader, which is to create the conditions for safety and for thriving. And to the messages that you've both put through, one of the messages that are really strong for me is learning through change, this capacity to learn as you're going through change. So change fluency is moving through change and moving with change and learning about yourself as you're moving through it. So you can use that learning and that growth to support you with the next step. And then you're learning more and that's supporting you with the next step. If the leader is dysregulated, they're unable to do that and their team's unable to do that. And that is wasted energy. That is wasted opportunity. And you're not setting up your team to thrive, which is, as a change leader, that is our role and responsibility.
It's a tricky one too, because I agree that storytelling can be incredibly powerful, particularly if the stories are relatable.
Yeah,
People can
absolutely.
feel a greater sense of confidence if they relate to that story of success. It also makes it sure that we remember that we have done some things that involve change before. Maybe we've taken on some really big challenges and we're here on the other side of that. What did we learn? Rather than just looking at, hey, we're feeling demanded upon and the resources we have, like to your point about the imbalance, trying to get the scales and the ratio right. Well, that's not always how it plays out. But we can help people to bring a healthy mindset to what's happening, to make sure that they don't forget what they have access to that has worked for them in the past. And unfortunately, if you've got a dysregulated leader or if you yourself are feeling tapped out, access to that capability can be really tricky because we can otherwise be in a sort of more of a scarcity orientation. I'm tapped out. I don't have what I need. I'm feeling under-resourced. And that can even be the prevailing catch cry of the do more with less, where we just don't have all the resources. A mindset on scarcity and deprivation is not necessarily setting us up to look for and be curious about and to open up and share in a safe environment. Hey, how about we don't do that and deprioritize it to make some more space for doing this? Or, hey, here's an alternative. Might we look at this as an opportunity? It might not have been how we've done it before, but all of that, entertaining that and thinking curiously and creatively about that, we need to have some space for that. We need to have the energy to get into that. We need to feel as though we can all share stories and talk with each other to support each other. So again, I'll throw a couple of cliches that I think fit, because we're talking about people investing in and looking after themselves. And we hear the overused cliche of the oxygen mask. But look, in the event of an increase in pressure, which you mentioned, we do have to look after ourselves and we shouldn't feel guilty about that. We need to invest in what enables us to be at our best. But the second cliche comes into effect too. It's not just about the individual and they have to take on that sole responsibility as if it's a teaspoon of cement, harden up and then you'll be right. No, there's a pit crew around us. We've just had the Formula One, a pit crew of support. What are the resources? If I'm running my laps as fast as I can and I'm risking blowing the energy up or I'm running out of fuel, who can I access to get some support with this and to look around us? Yeah.
I want to echo that point, because in my work with organisations, I think that's the most underutilised resource is the people around us. And I think part of the reason for that is when you're going through change and when you do start to get dysregulated, you literally don't see the support that's around you. You literally don't remember the positive stories of how you led yourself through change effectively. And so I think that's a big takeaway for us, is to really step back and look around and look at the people around you that you can leverage to support you through change, but also look back and say, hey, I've done this. I've done change my entire life. I have resources. I have positive stories. I have skills and capability that I can leverage myself, but also share with others, because it's something that we can be blinded to when we're in the moment.
And the last thing I'll say, just with leaders, the ability to do that and to then actually connect with your team and actually tune into what they need from you as service, not to talk down to them about all of the things that you've done, but to kind of meet them where they're at and to help them build a sense of some belief. You know, the wisdom of working through changes and stresses and difficulties and remembering that for yourself and then helping to pass that on can be super powerful.
There's a really great model. Cross and Thomas published it in HBR a good few years, maybe like 10 years ago now, talking about the value of the balanced network. And when I think about resources and people that we surround ourselves with, I think about what role are they playing for us. And the balanced network is one that has equal distribution across 4 types of people: your coaches, your supporters, your people who can give you information, and people that are in a position of power and have influence. So when you think about surrounding yourself with people to navigate change as an individual, as a leader, you want to be able to start to think a bit more intentionally and strategically about your network and think about the extent to which I have equal representation across those 4 domains. Do I have the support crew that is there to assist me? Do I have the coach who's been there, done that, tells me how it is, won't pull any punches? Do I have the right sources of information that I can get tough questions answered because people have knowledge and corporate memory? Do I have people in my network who are influential, who have access to resources, who can help me navigate and advocate for me? And so I think those sorts of frameworks can be really helpful when we're thinking about the composition of the people that we surround ourselves with.
Yeah, really good points. And it's got me thinking about the people that might be in an organization or a system where they're feeling like they're subject to a lot of change and not necessarily always feeling like they can have agency and yes, their own resources, their own ability to make sense of that, the self-talk, all very important. And I'm wondering, Marcel, how might someone in that context go about expanding their network and balancing out if they did a little audit in their mind and thought, actually, I don't have anyone that coaches me, or I don't really have anyone influential in my corner. How do they go about building that when they're subject to so much of their context in their minds?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that we would no doubt, I think we all work in the leadership development space, spend a lot of time with participants talking about how do you set your cadence, your operating rhythm, so that you've got time to work on your leadership as well as in your leadership, work on the business as well as in the business. So number one is creating time, I think, to really analyse my network, think quite intentionally about it, and think about what are the relationships that I would like to initiate and who might help me form those connections. So I think quite practically a big one is recognising that intentional work is really important and creating the time and space to do it. I think we are working in more networked ways than ever before. So I think often what happens is we work with stakeholders or team members or colleagues and think about what is the job here to be done, what is the project to be achieved, what is the task to be delivered, but we don't necessarily think about how that relationship might evolve and take different forms. And I think it's moving from perhaps transaction to more strategic, from operational networks to more strategic, evolving, growing relationships where they might indeed become a supporter for you, not simply another person in a project team that I'm working with to deliver an outcome. Would you add any builds?
Oh, it's just making me think of crafting. So, and if we want to continue trying to make this something that's quite practical and to even think pragmatically, what are the different ways that I might look at opportunities for crafting? So, what's going to support me through change? And it could be, okay, there's a way that I need to alter or adapt or recalibrate tasks and priorities.
Yep.
And that would help me ensure that I'm focused on the right things at the right time based on what is required of me. And then there might be relational crafting. Okay, if I'm muscling through this individually, well, who is the together that is in it with me? And what could that look like if I work with them differently? And then I was thinking just how, because I'm talking about these as if they're separate, but they can be a beautiful chain reaction when we explore different pathways. The cognitive crafting opportunities reminds me of this beautiful study looking at custodial services janitors in hospitals. And recognizing that there were some that just approached their work very, very differently. And the mindset that they brought to their work was a game changer. It led them to do their tasks differently, to organize what was important, and to relate to others in the hospital system. So these janitors had almost outlier level of well-being and engagement and happiness, and it's because they saw themselves as a fundamental part of the healthcare system. Patient outcomes, and doctors, surgeons, nurses couldn't get the outcomes for their patients unless they were doing a great job. And they even identified, you know what, if I can recognize that some of these patients that are in here for long stays, maybe it would be enriching for their healing experience to change the flowers and the artwork on the wall that they've been staring at for the last couple of weeks. And you think about how that can unlock change. People are putting change on their own plates. Yet, again, like, we can talk about change as if it's destabilizing and it's a problem, but it's never going away. Well, change can be powerfully good for making progress. There's opportunity for innovation. So what might we harness if we bring a different mindset to it,
Yeah, I love that.
And just a reminder that in a few minutes we will be opening up for Q&A. So please submit questions if you haven't already, and you can also upvote any questions that are already there that you would like to see responded to. Great. I'm really glad you brought that study up. I mean, it reminds me of that classic quote about the janitor at NASA, putting people on the moon. And it really does speak to this notion of identity. And what do we see as our role? How do we create value within this context? And that's a mindset shift that automatically creates agency, doesn't it? Regardless of what's happening around us, what's the sort of identity that we bring into our work? And Janet, I'm wondering, what are some of the ways that you've seen people do that successfully?
Identity is an interesting one. Some of the work I do is about helping people clarify their identity with work. And on the other hand, some of my work is about decoupling your identity from work because they can become too closely interlocked. So if I take a balanced view here, I think for me, identity comes from responsibility. So when you're thinking about your role and the impact you want to have through your role, then you ask yourself, what is the level of responsibility that I want to bring to this? What does that look like? And therefore, what identity do I need to adopt to be able to bring that through my work every day and to do so authentically? I think if you start with responsibility and then think about the impact you want to have and then craft an identity around that, it helps to bring your authenticity through rather than doing it the other way, rather than what identity do I want to start with and how do I bring that in? So that's the way I look at identity. It comes down to what is that authentic place that you go to when you think about the work that I do and what I love and what lights me up. To your point, Adrian, that all good things come from change. All good things come from change. So yes, today's focus is on navigating the chaos of change, but good things come from chaos as well. So that's an important thing. So what is the identity I want to bring? What mindset do I need to bring to bring that through? And then that unlocks a whole range of inner resources that we've been talking about.
Yeah. I've got an interesting example just from last Friday, some work I was doing with a client where that identity piece became really important, particularly in a period of change. They'd had a period of time where they would be acting a level up in the New South Wales public service. And they could recognise the need to change how they approach their work. They were a very driven, highly altruistic, service-orientated, dutiful public servant, and that's fantastic. They felt this tension in leveling up into this leadership role to have to be very pragmatic in the way they organised and presented risks, and they felt they needed to find a way to be in that identity because the overly emotionally altruistic and empathetic leader, that wasn't going to help them level up into this sort of identity in this leadership level role. And I just wanted to support them, which did happen, and they would have probably come about it themselves. But to realize I don't have to let go of one identity to also acknowledge this way of being is going to be suitable for this context. But I can notice the drive from who I am at my core, but find a way to to be of service in this more pragmatic, risk-orientated, strategic focus, but not have to divorce myself of what has been fueling me to be my best professional that got me this opportunity to act a level up anyway. So we can be an amazing container for all sorts of possibilities. And it's not about just picking one at the expense of another. It's about tuning into what's going to help us.
Like sing between them.
Yeah, what a great example of the human capacity to build new muscles.
Yes.
And not necessarily be one-dimensional in the way that we've defined success in ourselves in a particular paradigm can evolve and shift. It's really encouraging. I always think, we shouldn't shame ourselves for the things that we've done in the past that perhaps haven't worked, but we learn from them and we evolve and we can grow through and do things differently next time. And I think humans have an incredible ability to grow through, build new muscles, create new mindsets, create new internal dialogue, and see their work and their contribution in different ways as the world evolves around us.
Yeah, it is a really good example of the coming together of the self and the role in pursuit of a purpose. And perhaps the cost becomes high and it becomes harder to sustain when we put the role ahead of the unique value that the individual in that role or that team can bring. I'd love to go to some questions from the audience now. And Adrian, I'm going to start with you on this one, but please, everyone contribute. But you mentioned capabilities before. And someone's asked, what are the capabilities that can be built to become more fluent in change? And how do you go about that for yourself as a leader and for your team? So I think we've talked about a number today that you could perhaps synthesize, but also any additional that we haven't.
Ones that I'm working with quite a bit at the moment, and these words are commonly used, but we can stack the deck in our favor to use those capabilities if we know the skills, almost like a checklist. If I'm doing these things, these can really help. But communication and cooperation, and for those that are watching and listening who might be wanting something to be a bit more exciting and sexy than that, well, these fundamentals are so valuable. Communication is not just about the way that we're delivering information, it's communicating with ourselves. So tuning in, what am I aware of? Can I have that exchange first rather than just reacting on autopilot or reacting based on the stress of the stimulus? Can I actually understand what do I need and then feel a level of safety or courage or find some safety to speak up about that, hey? But of course, we then need to be aware and considerate enough of the needs of others. So, okay, can I actually use questioning and listening and being patient in the pace to tune into what do others need? What do they need from themselves? What might they need from me? Growth mindset we heard about. So what do I need to rethink? What do I need to experiment with? And truly, I could take a lot of time going through them, but communication and cooperation, finding ways to understand and meet the needs of all parties through change is really important. The other one is knowing that there's a capability we can build that is more in line with that idea of change fluency, that it's not this predetermined 5 steps, 1 to 5, done. No, there's a whole messy cycle that's going on, and we will test and learn and we will fail, and relapse doesn't need to be a dirty word at all. We can recover from that, recalibrate, to use a word that you've used, Marcel. I think it's really powerful when we know there are some predictable cycles that we go through. There's some steps that we can take, and at every step we might fall down, and we can learn from that and get ourselves back on track. Maybe we just try again, or maybe we try again differently, having had the stumble and learned from it.
Yeah. So if I was going to add a practice to that, because I'm completely aligned with what you've shared there, Adrian, for leaders, for me, it's reflection. So we can lose ourselves in the process of change. We can be so focused on what I'm doing and how I'm doing it as you're moving through and working through change. But it's having that awareness to step back and reflect on how is it going, what is working, what is not working, where do I need to flex, where do I need to do something different. And I think that when we have this reflective capacity, we're more open to course correction. and we're more open to learning from failures, things that haven't worked, we can see the experimentation that's part of navigating change and leading yourself through change. And I continually talk to leaders about their reflection practice. So for anyone listening that doesn't have a reflective practice, I encourage you to play with that. So even asking yourself 3 questions, what worked well, what didn't work well, what will I do differently next time, is a way to get that data, that valuable data, it's gold, that then helps you to then apply that next time and continue to grow through change, which is one of the key elements of today that change fluency offers us. It's a real opportunity. Yeah.
And I just add, I think there's a couple of concepts that come to mind, building on this concept of cooperation. I think one of the things that we can do is move from an egocentric mindset to an ecocentric mindset. So really think about we are stronger together, and in a system, in an organisation in which I'm working, how do I leverage the power of the collective to be able to navigate through change? And then there's capabilities and muscles around setback and recovery. As I go through hard times, how am I appraising the learning that comes from that? How am I nourishing and nurturing myself through that journey? And how do I use reflective practice to think about the gains that I will make and how I can apply those learnings in the future? And then I'll probably add innovation and creativity, being able to see problems, think about them differently. And I think this is where a little bit of heat actually can help unlock new things, is that sort of nice space of stress before it tips over and becomes too much of a good thing. So there's 3 that come to mind that I think are really important capabilities and muscles to build.
I love the idea of the ecosystem as well, because to help individuals, to help people recognize the value and power of reflective practice, but to also know in organizations, we can create an environment and have some rhythm to the way that we, I guess, nudge or prompt that reflection. And so one of the things that we do a lot in my company, Benny Button, we've got a check-in methodology and even a digital tool. And the point is, sometimes it can be hard to change what you can't see. It can be hard to lead what is invisible. And that can include holding up the mirror to check in, where am I at? And with what's happening, and that can include the changes, what might be fluctuating? Are things going in the right direction? Do I need to course correct? That's individually as a prompted reflective practice. But then what does this look like when we're a scattering of diverse experiences in the flow of all of this? And how can we tune into that being a picture of who we are and how we're going, and have that not be full stop, there's the answer? No, this is a signal for us to get into dialogue. So what does need to change, and what are some ways in which we can now be more intentional about course correcting where we might need to?
Yeah. Really great answers. And I'm going to kind of suggest a bit of a lightning round because we've got so many questions. And
rapid fire.
I'd love to. There's really great questions. So kind of moving on to the next one, Marcel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what change means in a highly uncertain world, particularly due to AI. This question asker is saying they're having a bit of difficulty defining a vision and meaningful goals for change in this context of high uncertainty, and particularly around what is AI going to look like?
Yes, that's a fabulous question. Where is my mind taking me on that one? I think we need to create goals and direction and a pathway that we are confident enough in, probably with a sort of 6-month parameter to it, and balance that perhaps with ultimately a 1 to 2 year horizon. I think they're the right kind of parameters. I think gone are the days of the 5-year strategy. A lot of people are now talking about what's our goal, where do we want to be in 2030? And at our firm, we have a 12-month rolling plan. So we review, revisit our success plan or our strategy every 12 months. But I know that at our half-year point and our quarterly points, we'll just check in and see how we're going. So I think those sort of time parameters are appropriate. We need to really be checking in on how we are going quarterly, every 6 months, and then planning kind of 1 to 2 years, I think. In terms of technology, that must be part of the thinking and dialogue from the very beginning. And I think the way to think about it is, as I'm doing my planning, as I'm setting my goals, as I'm setting my vision, what is it that technology is enabling? And become reasonably fluent in the platforms that are out there, what they're offering, the good ones that are out there, so that you can at least have a bit of a handle and be somewhat literate in what the systems are doing. And make sure that that literacy is brought into your thinking as you're doing that planning. Don't try to do planning without any reference to technology. Think about how is technology enabling, affecting, shaping, replacing everything that I'm doing work-wise. And I think if you start thinking on that now, then setting the goals, you should hopefully be able to have a strategy or a plan, a set of goals that I think can lead to success.
Mm-hmm. So agility in action means not trying to get it right. It's making the bet and remembering that there is no crystal ball.
Yeah, and don't just read about new technology and take an interest in it and think, oh, that's happening over there, that's interesting. Really think about our ways of working are changing and need to change. What will need to change? We're spending a lot of time internally in our firm, but also with clients, rewriting the task list, recreating much more dynamic PDs to reflect what technology is doing and what it will replace at a task level. That's pretty granular, but I think that's the thinking that you have to do to be able to set meaningful goals and well-informed goals.
Yeah. So a couple more questions. We've only got a few minutes left and then we'll go to takeaways. Janet, someone's asked, how can you help a leader who is dysregulated see the issues in this space? So someone else rather than your own regulation.
So how to help someone understand that they're dysregulated?
Yeah, like what do you do when a leader is dysregulated?
So to be able to have a conversation about how your leader is showing up for you, there needs to be a level of trust and psychological safety. So assuming that you have a level of trust and psychological safety, my guidance is to broach the conversation. And a really nice way of sharing information like that, which can feel safe and build safety in the conversation, is say something like, this is what I've noticed. And with dysregulation, what we're really looking for is a change in regular behaviour. You're seeing a disruption to their regular pattern of behaviour. And so if you are coming from, as you've talked to, Adrian, coming from a place of empathy and you're coming from a place of compassion and genuine desire to support that leader, allow that to come through the conversation. What I've noticed is this. This is different to how you would normally show up. I'm concerned about you. I would like to talk to you about it. And sometimes that invitation is what that leader absolutely needs to be able to be vulnerable with another human being and say, actually, this change is affecting me too. I'm a human being going through this change as well. So that's assuming that there is enough trust and psychological safety to have a conversation like that, because bringing something like dysregulation to someone else's attention can be risky. So what's really important is to go at the speed of trust. So if you've got this much trust, lean in this much. If you've got this much trust, lean in that much. And start the conversation and be aware of how it's going and continue to build it from there. Not everything has to be said in the one conversation. So you can broach the topic, start to have the conversation about what you're noticing, see how that goes and build from there.
Yep, it's a long process. We're going to move to closing comments now, and I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds to just provide one key takeaway, one thing that you would like the audience to put into practice this week. And Adrian, perhaps you could start.
Gosh, you know what? I just did it. Don't forget to breathe.
Love that.
Truly, I mean, it might seem like it's coming from an odd direction, but something that I've learned about myself and through the research that I've done and in supporting leaders and employees, it's not underestimating just how beneficial it is to tune into how our breath can help us to regulate, how very intentionally done in-breath can activate and wake us up, can alert us, that where our breath is in our body and how we can lengthen the exhale to just give ourselves an opportunity for some space to think clearly. And truly for me, it's been a game changer, and in helping others reconnect with the breath as a doorway into how they're feeling, what's going on, where they're holding change and stress-related tension in their bodies, what that's doing to impact their headspace and their self-talk. I remember a CEO of a large hospital, and
we might have to leave that story to next time. Marcel, could you give us your key takeaway?
Healthy boundaries is really important to set, but think of them as boundaries, not rigid walls. We can navigate change and we can approach it through the lens of trade-offs. So, I can deliver that job for you, but not until next week. What would you like me to reshift on my priority list to get it to you urgently? Look at things through a what's possible lens, not through a scarcity lens. And learn to say no, but in a way that still conveys hope and optimism and possibility.
Right. Thank you. And Janet?
We've shared a lot today. So my takeaway for everyone listening and watching is to remember the resourcefulness you already bring to change. Start there. Connect with what you already bring. Connect with your inner resources. Connect with the strengths and experiences you already have, and then build. Look at what the gap is. And develop capability in that space. So you're already resourceful. Yeah.
It's clear we could have spent another 3 hours talking here because of your insight. And so Janet, Adrian, Marcel, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for tuning in to the audience. A reminder that this same time tomorrow will be the next session in the Level Up series, and we will hopefully see you then. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.